The distress beacon had been blinking for 3 days before Silas finally answered it. Not because he was busy, station repair work rarely demanded urgency, but because he had grown used to ignoring anything that hinted at complication. Complications meant people, and people meant expectations. And expectations had a way of settling on his shoulders like fine metallic dust that never washed away. Still, the beacon's signal pattern was unusual, precise yet slightly uneven, as if the transmitter itself were exhausted. Curiosity, that stubborn old habit he thought he had lost, finally pushed him into his small service craft. The damaged vessel drifted beyond the outer ring of the station's traffic zone, its hull reflecting the pale light of a distant blue star. It was not a cargo ship, nor a military craft. Its lines were elegant, almost artistic, with sweeping curves that suggested it had been designed by someone who valued beauty as much as function. Scorch marks scarred the surface, and one of the forward stabilizers hung at an angle that made Silas wince in professional sympathy. He guided his craft alongside and sealed the airlock. The interior atmosphere registered as breathable, though faintly scented with something unfamiliar, like citrus mixed with cold metal. He stepped inside, expecting silence. Instead, he heard arguing. "I told you the vector was incorrect," a sharp voice was saying. "It was not incorrect. It was adventurous," another voice replied defensively. "There is a difference between adventurous and catastrophic," a third voice added, sounding tired but determined. Silas followed the voices to the command deck and stopped in the doorway. 3 women stood around the navigation console, all of them so similar in appearance that for a moment he thought they might be reflections of one another. They looked almost human, same proportions, same expressive eyes, but their ears were long and graceful, tapering slightly upward, giving them an otherworldly elegance. One had dark hair tied in a severe braid. Another wore hers loose and tangled, as if she had run her hands through it 100 times. And the third had cut hers short, unevenly, as though she had grown impatient halfway through. They turned simultaneously when they noticed him. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then the one with the braid straightened. "You are the engineer who answered our beacon?" "That depends," Silas said calmly. "Are you the ones who nearly turned a perfectly functional fusion manifold into a decorative sculpture?" The shortest of the 3 gasped. "It was not decorative. It was glowing purple," Silas said. "Things should not glow purple unless they are supposed to." The one with tangled hair pressed her lips together, clearly trying not to laugh, while the braided one sighed. "I am Lyra," she said. "These are my sisters, Senna and Veyra. And yes, we may have made certain miscalculations." "Miscalculations," Silas repeated, glancing at the flickering console. "That is a gentle word for what I am seeing." Veyra folded her arms. "It is still flying, is it not?" "Barely," Silas replied. "And only because the universe is feeling generous today." To his surprise, Senna actually smiled at that, a quick flash of amusement that softened her otherwise serious expression. "Can you repair it?" she asked. Silas stepped forward, already studying the readouts. The damage was extensive: overstrained conduits, misaligned field regulators, and at least one subsystem that appeared to have been reassembled in a way that defied both physics and common sense. He felt a slow, familiar focus settle over him, the quiet satisfaction of a problem that demanded patience rather than speed. "Yes," he said at last, "but it will take time, and I will need all of you to stop touching things." Veyra looked offended. "I do not touch things randomly." At that exact moment, a loose panel behind her sparked loudly. Silas raised an eyebrow. "I touch things thoughtfully," she amended. The work began immediately. Hours passed as Silas moved through the ship, opening panels, running diagnostics, and carefully undoing well-intentioned but disastrous repairs. The sisters followed him at first, asking questions, then arguing about the answers, then apologizing to each other in voices that carried more affection than irritation. He began to notice the patterns between them. Lyra tried to take responsibility for every decision, even when she clearly doubted herself. Senna analyzed everything, her mind moving so quickly that her words sometimes struggled to keep pace. Veyra, restless and impulsive, masked her worry with humor, making exaggerated salutes whenever Silas issued instructions. At one point, while recalibrating the engine core, Silas heard a loud clang behind him and turned to see Veyra holding a heavy wrench. "I thought," she said cautiously, "that perhaps striking the casing lightly might—" "No," Silas said immediately. "I had not finished my sentence. You did not need to." Senna covered her mouth, trying to suppress laughter, and even Lyra's stern expression cracked for a moment. The sound of that laughter lingered in the engine room long after the echo faded, and Silas found himself smiling faintly as he returned to his work. That night cycle, though the concept of night was artificial in deep space, they sat together in the small galley, sharing a meal that consisted of nutrient packs and something Veyra insisted on cooking herself. It tasted surprisingly good, though Silas suspected that was only because he had expected it to be terrible. "You have been on the station long?" Lyra asked. "Long enough to forget why I went there in the first place," Silas said. Senna tilted her head. "And why did you?" He considered the question. "To build things," he said finally. "To fix things. To feel useful." He shrugged slightly. "Somewhere along the way, it became routine." Veyra leaned back in her chair. "Routine sounds unbearable." "It is," Silas said, "but it is also safe." For a moment, none of them spoke. Outside the viewport, a field of distant stars drifted silently, their light ancient and indifferent. Then Veyra brightened suddenly. "When this ship is repaired," she said, "I will show you how I fly through an asteroid corridor." Lyra groaned softly. "Please do not encourage her." "I am not encouraging," Silas said. "I am preparing to install additional safety restraints." Veyra laughed, a clear, bright sound that filled the small galley, and even Lyra could not help smiling. Later, as Silas lay in the small guest quarters they had given him, he listened to the faint hum of the ship's systems and the distant murmur of the sisters' voices drifting through the corridor. He realized with mild surprise that he was not thinking about the station at all. The endless, identical days, the silent corridors, the sense of time slipping past unnoticed, all of it felt strangely far away. For the first time in years, he felt awake. Silas woke to the faint vibration of tools sliding across a metal surface and the unmistakable sound of two people whispering loudly enough that the whispering defeated its own purpose. "I told you he would notice," Senna was saying. "He is asleep," Veyra replied. "Engineers sleep like rocks." "I do not," Silas said from the doorway. Both of them jumped. Veyra nearly dropped the diagnostic tablet she was holding, catching it at the last second with an expression of heroic triumph, as if gravity itself had been defeated. "We were only looking," Senna said quickly. "At what?" Silas asked. "The auxiliary regulator," Veyra admitted. "We thought we might try recalibrating it ourselves." Silas stepped closer, studying the open panel. "And did you?" "No," Senna said. "We argued about the correct method for 43 minutes. That," Silas said, "is probably the safest outcome." He knelt beside the panel and began adjusting the regulator, explaining each step as he worked. At first, the sisters listened quietly, but before long, questions began to flow. Sharp, curious, relentless. Senna asked about thermal tolerances, Lyra about redundancy protocols, and Veyra about what would happen if someone accidentally reversed the polarity of a containment field purely as a hypothetical exercise. "It would fail," Silas said. "How badly?" Silas looked at her. "Explosively." Veyra nodded thoughtfully. "Good to know." By mid-cycle, the engine room was warmer, alive with the steady pulse of restored systems. Silas moved through the ship methodically, repairing conduits, rebalancing power flows, and replacing components that had been pushed far beyond their intended limits. The work was absorbing in a way he had almost forgotten was possible. This was not routine maintenance on predictable station equipment. Every section of the vessel revealed design choices he had never seen before. Elegant solutions layered with subtle flaws that only revealed themselves under stress. The Kyrathi, he realized, built ships the way artists painted. Beautifully, sometimes impractically, but always with intention. At one point he paused inside a narrow access corridor, studying a crystalline data lattice embedded in the wall. The structure pulsed faintly with internal light, storing navigational records in patterns of shifting color rather than code. "It responds to touch," Lyra said from behind him. Silas reached out cautiously, and the lattice brightened, projecting a faint map of star systems in midair. The projection shimmered, alive with motion, showing routes traced in soft threads of silver. Our parents designed that interface, Lyra said quietly. They believed navigation should feel like following constellations, not reading numbers. Silas glanced at her. For the first time, he saw not just determination in her expression, but grief held carefully in place, like a fragile component that might crack under pressure. They must have been a remarkable engineer, he said. They were, Senna said softly. Veyra, who had been uncharacteristically silent, cleared her throat. And terrible cooks, she added. Once our mother tried to prepare something called layered nutrient gel. It achieved structural integrity. Silas blinked. Structural integrity? We used it as a doorstop for 3 months, Veyra said solemnly. The tension in the corridor eased, and even Lyra smiled faintly. Work continued. Hours blurred into one another as Silas replaced the damaged field stabilizer and recalibrated the navigation array. The sisters assisted where they could, though their methods differed dramatically. Senna anticipated problems before they appeared, handing him tools at precisely the right moment. Lyra checked and rechecked system readings, determined not to overlook anything again. Veyra provided enthusiastic support, which mostly consisted of holding lights at creative angles and offering commentary such as, "That looks important," or, "If it starts sparking, should I run?" "Yes," Silas said, "run far." Late in the cycle, an unexpected tremor ran through the ship. The deck vibrated, and a low warning tone sounded. Senna was at the console instantly. "External debris," she said. "A microfield of metallic fragments. They are drifting close to the hull." Silas moved to the viewport. Outside, tiny shards glinted in the starlight, moving slowly but steadily, drawn by faint gravitational currents. "Not dangerous," he said after a moment, "but irritating, like sand in machinery." Veyra leaned beside him, peering out. "They are beautiful," she said. "They will be less beautiful if they scratch the sensor array," Senna replied. They adjusted the ship's orientation slightly, letting the fragments drift past in a silent, glittering cloud. For a few minutes, all 4 of them stood at the viewport, watching the slow ballet of drifting metal illuminated by distant stars. It was a quiet moment, and Silas felt something shift inside him. Not dramatic, not sudden, but subtle, like a long dormant system coming online. He realized he was enjoying himself. The thought was so unfamiliar that it startled him. That evening, they gathered again in the galley. This time, Senna attempted to cook, following a recipe displayed on a flickering screen. The result was edible but extremely dense. "I believe," Silas said carefully, "that this could be classified as a construction material." Senna looked offended. Veyra burst into laughter, nearly spilling her drink, and even Lyra leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. "You are all terrible at this," Silas said. "I will cook tomorrow." "You cook?" Veyra said, eyes widening as if he had revealed a hidden superpower. "I survived on a station for 12 years, Silas said. Cooking was not optional." They talked late into the cycle, about small things at first, navigation routes, strange cargoes Silas had once repaired, the peculiar customs of different colonies. Gradually, the conversation drifted to larger things. Exploration, the pull of unknown stars, the quiet fear of being responsible for something larger than oneself. When the others finally retired, Silas remained in the galley a while longer, staring at the faint reflections of starlight on the metal table. He realized that the ship no longer felt like a job. It felt like the beginning of something, though he could not yet say what. And for the first time in years, the future did not feel like an empty corridor stretching endlessly ahead. It felt like a door, slightly open, with light spilling through the gap. By the 4th day, the ship no longer sounded wounded. The deep hum of its engines had steadied, the faint rattles in the outer conduits were gone, and the lighting panels no longer flickered, as if unsure whether to remain alive. Silas stood in the engine bay, with his hands resting on the edge of an open console, listening to the steady rhythm of the reactor. A well-tuned machine always had a kind of music to it, subtle but unmistakable, and this one was finally beginning to sing again. Behind him, Veyra was sprawled across the floor, staring up at the ceiling while spinning a small magnetic tool in the air and catching it with theatrical flair. If you drop that into the coolant intake, Silas said without turning, I will personally space you. You would miss me, Veyra replied. I would miss the quiet, he said. She grinned at the ceiling. You like us? Silas did not answer, which only made her grin wider. Senna entered the bay carrying a data slate. Primary navigation array is stable, she said. Power distribution is within acceptable variance. And Lyra has been recalculating our long-range charts for the last 2 hours without speaking to anyone, which I believe is a new personal record. Very amusing, Lyra said from the doorway, though there was no real irritation in her voice. Silas closed the console and wiped his hands on a cloth. That is the last of the critical repairs, he said. You should be able to depart safely now. The words hung in the air longer than he expected. Veyra sat up. That is all? She said. That is all, Silas replied. The rest is routine maintenance. You can handle that. No one spoke for a moment. The steady hum of the engine filled the silence. Well, Senna said at last, her voice carefully neutral, then we are grateful. Yes, Lyra added. More than we can properly express. Silas inclined his head slightly. You are welcome. He turned and began gathering his tools. The movements were automatic, practiced through years of repetition. Wrench into the case, diagnostic probe into its slot, cables coiled neatly. Yet something about the process felt heavier than usual, as if each movement carried more weight than it should. When he closed the case, the sound seemed final. I will return to the station within the hour, he said. Still no one answered. He lifted the case and walked toward the airlock. The corridor felt longer than he remembered. The soft lighting, the faint scent of unfamiliar metals, the distant murmur of systems, all of it seemed strangely vivid, as if he were seeing it for the first time while already knowing he was about to leave it behind. He reached the airlock and set the case down to cycle the hatch. Wait! The word came from behind him. Silas turned. The three sisters stood in the corridor close together. For a moment, none of them spoke, and he felt a faint, inexplicable unease, as if he were standing on the edge of something he did not yet understand. Lyra stepped forward. Her hands were clenched at her sides, and though her posture was straight, there was a tremor in her voice when she spoke. Before you go, she said, there is something we must ask. Silas nodded once. Go on. Lyra glanced at her sisters. Senna gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Veyra looked uncharacteristically serious. Then, without warning, all three of them dropped to their knees. Silas stared at them, certain for a moment that he had misunderstood what he was seeing. What are you doing, Avroquan? He said. Please, Lyra said, her voice steady but urgent. Stay with us. Silas blinked. What? Join our crew, Senna said. We need a fourth. Silas looked from one to the other, trying to determine whether this was some kind of elaborate joke. Their expressions told him it was not. I am an engineer, he said slowly. I repair ships. That is all. That is not all, Veyra said. You are patient. You are calm. You explain things without shouting. Do you know how rare that is? I have been shouted at plenty, Silas said. Exactly, Veyra said. And yet you do not shout back. It is very impressive. Senna leaned forward slightly. Kyrathi deep space law requires a minimum crew of 4 for exploration missions. Without it, our license will be revoked. The ship will be impounded. Our parents' expedition will end. Silas felt a faint tightening in his chest. You could hire someone. We tried, Lyra said quietly. No one would come. 3 inexperienced sisters, newly in command, traveling alone. No one trusted us. Some thought we were foolish. Others thought we would not survive a year. Veyra looked down at the floor. Some said worse. Silas exhaled slowly. And you think I should stay? We know you should, Senna said. Silas hesitated. You barely know me. Lyra met his eyes. We know enough. The corridor was silent except for the distant hum of the engines. Silas looked at the 3 of them kneeling there. Proud, stubborn, and clearly desperate enough to cast aside that pride. He felt the weight of their hope pressing against his thoughts, unsettling in its intensity. I cannot decide this in a moment, he said at last. Then do not decide in a moment, Veyra said quickly. Decide in 2 moments. Despite himself, Silas almost smiled. Lyra shot her sister a look, but the tension in the air had eased slightly. A trial period, Senna said. Stay with us for a time. If you wish to leave, you may, but give us a chance to prove we are worth staying with." Silas looked down at his tool case, then back at the three sisters. For years, his life had been predictable, safe, and quietly empty. Every day had resembled the one before it, stretching into the next like identical panels in an endless corridor. And now in front of him, three determined, grieving, exasperating strangers were offering him something he had not felt in a long time. Purpose. He rubbed the back of his neck, buying himself a few seconds to think. "If I agree," he said slowly, "there will be rules." Veyra brightened instantly. "I like rules." "You will not like these rules," Silas said. "No unauthorized repairs, no experimental engine modifications, and absolutely no striking machinery with ceremonial tools." Veyra looked mildly disappointed. "Even gently. Especially gently." Senna exhaled in quiet relief. Lyra closed her eyes briefly, as if steadying herself. "So," she said softly, "you will stay?" Silas looked at them, really looked, and felt something inside him settle into place, like a component finally locking into alignment. "For a while," he said. Veyra leapt to her feet so quickly she nearly collided with the bulkhead. Senna laughed, a rare, unguarded sound, and Lyra simply stood there, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since he had met her. And as the hum of the ship filled the corridor, Silas realized that, without quite meaning to, he had already crossed the threshold of that open door he had sensed days before. The first morning after Silas agreed to stay began with an alarm loud enough to make him sit upright in bed, convinced for one disoriented second that the reactor had ruptured. He pulled on his jacket and hurried into the corridor, only to find Veyra standing at a wall panel, staring at it with great seriousness while the alarm continued to howl. "What happened?" Silas asked. "I was testing the emergency alert system," Veyra said. "At dawn? I wanted to be thorough." Silas reached past her and silenced the alarm. The sudden quiet rang in his ears. "From now on," he said calmly, "we test emergency systems when everyone is awake." "They are awake now," Veyra pointed out. From somewhere down the corridor, Senna's voice drifted faintly. "I am not awake. I am suffering." Lyra appeared a moment later, her hair still loose from sleep, looking as if she were calculating whether throwing someone out an airlock would violate any laws she cared about. Silas folded his arms. "Crew rule number 1, he said. If the ship is not exploding, do not wake the engineer before morning cycle." Veyra raised a hand. "What if it is only slightly exploding?" "Then wake me," Silas said, "but only slightly." That set the tone for the days that followed. They began organizing the ship properly, which turned out to be a larger task than repairing it. Storage compartments had been filled without logic, tools scattered wherever they were last used, and navigation records stored in at least 3 different systems because, as Senna admitted, it seemed efficient at the time. Silas established order with patient persistence. He labeled compartments, reorganized tool racks, and created maintenance schedules. Lyra took the schedules seriously, checking them with almost ceremonial dedication. Senna improved them, adding precise timing and redundancies that made Silas nod in approval. Veyra decorated the labels with small drawings of stars and improbable creatures, which Silas pretended to object to, but secretly found useful for identifying compartments quickly. One afternoon, while recalibrating the maneuvering thrusters, Silas let Veyra assist under close supervision. "Not that lever," he said. "I was not touching that lever." "You were looking at it in a way that suggested future touching," Veyra sighed. "You are very suspicious." "I am alive," Silas said. "There is a connection." Despite the humor, progress was real. The sisters learned quickly, each in her own way. Lyra practiced command decisions and simulation drills, her voice growing steadier with each attempt. Senna refined sensor calibration techniques until the ship's detection range exceeded its original specifications. Veyra, to everyone's surprise, proved to be a remarkably precise pilot when she focused, guiding the ship through a field of drifting ice fragments with movements so smooth that even Silas felt a flicker of admiration. That evening, they gathered in the galley again, this time eating a meal Silas had prepared, simple but warm and satisfying. I did not know food could taste like this, Veyra said, staring at her plate as if it might vanish. That is because you were previously eating structural materials, Silas replied. Senna nodded thoughtfully. That explains the texture. Lyra leaned back in her chair, watching them with an expression Silas could not quite read. Something softer than relief, but deeper than contentment. You have changed the ship already, she said quietly. Silas shook his head. No, you changed it. I only showed you how. Later, the ship entered a region of sparse nebular gas, faint clouds of silver drifting across the stars. The view through the observation window was breathtaking, the light refracting into shifting ribbons that seemed to move with a life of their own. They stood together in silence for a while. My parents loved regions like this, Lyra said at last. They said nebulae were reminders that even chaos can become beautiful, given time. Veyra tilted her head. That sounds like something you would say when an engine explodes, but you want to remain optimistic. Senna snorted, and even Lyra laughed softly. Silas watched the drifting light, feeling the quiet settle around them like a shared breath. He realized he no longer felt like a visitor. The corridors no longer seemed unfamiliar. The hum of the engines no longer distant. He knew the sound of each system, the rhythm of each cycle, the subtle way the deck vibrated when the thrusters adjusted course. He belonged here, at least for now. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. The next morning brought their first scheduled systems drill. Silas simulated a minor power failure, watching as the sisters responded. Lyra issued commands, her voice steady. Senna rerouted energy flows with practiced precision. Veyra stabilized the ship's orientation, muttering encouragement to the thrusters as if they could hear her. When the drill ended, Silas nodded. Not bad. Not bad, Veyra said indignantly. We were excellent. You were acceptable, Silas corrected. She folded her arms. You are very difficult to impress. I am impressed, he said. I simply prefer not to say it too often. It keeps people motivated. Veyra stared at him for a moment, then laughed. You are learning to be Kyrathi, she said. And what does that mean? It means, she said, grinning, that you are becoming stubborn. That night, as Silas walked alone through the quiet corridors, he paused in the engine room, listening to the steady pulse of the reactor. The ship felt alive, not just functioning, but thriving, as if responding to the care and attention of those aboard. He rested a hand lightly on the cool metal of the console. For years, he had fixed machines that left and never returned, ships that vanished into the endless dark while he remained behind, unchanged. Now he was part of the journey, and for the first time in a long while, the thought of tomorrow filled him not with indifference, but with anticipation. The first true expedition began quietly, almost deceptively so. The ship drifted beyond the last mapped relay buoy, leaving behind the faint lattice of traffic routes and entering a region where the stars seemed wider apart, the darkness deeper, as if space itself were exhaling. Silas stood behind the command seats, watching the sensor displays as Senna monitored long-range scans with intense concentration. Radiation levels stable, she said. No large gravitational distortions within 3 million kilometers. That is comforting, Veyra said from the pilot's chair. I prefer my distortions small and polite. Lyra allowed herself a faint smile but kept her eyes on the forward display. Maintain heading. Reduce thrust by 2%. Veyra adjusted the controls with careful precision. Silas noticed the difference immediately. The impulsive movements he had seen when they first met were gone, replaced by measured, deliberate corrections. She was still energetic, still restless, but now there was discipline beneath it. They were learning. Hours passed as they traveled deeper into the uncharted region. Then Senna leaned forward suddenly. I am detecting a debris field, she said. Not natural, metallic composition, irregular fragments, possibly remnants of a vessel. Lyra straightened. Distance? 40,000 kilometers. Drifting slowly. Silas stepped closer to the console. Bring us in carefully. Keep the shields at low power. Small fragments can still puncture a hull if they strike at the right angle. Veyra guided the ship forward, her hands steady on the controls. As they approached, the debris field came into view, a silent cloud of shattered metal and crystalline components glinting faintly in the starlight. "What happened here?" Lyra murmured. Silas studied the fragments. "Hard to say. Could be collision, reactor failure, or—" A shard drifted past the viewport, close enough to reveal faint markings along its surface, symbols etched in a language none of them recognized. "Not Kyrathi," Senna said quietly. Veyra shifted in her seat. "I do not like the look of this place." "Neither do I," Silas admitted. "Proceed slowly." They entered the field at minimal speed, thrusters whispering. The ship moved between drifting fragments, some no larger than tools, others massive enough to cast shadows across the hull. The silence outside felt immense, pressing against the ship like deep water. Then the sensors flickered. "Interference," Senna said sharply. "Metallic resonance. It is disrupting our scans." Lyra's voice remained calm, but Silas could hear the tension beneath it. "Can you compensate?" "I am trying." A faint vibration passed through the deck. "What was that?" Veyra said. Silas was already moving. "Micro-impact," he said, glancing at the structural readout. "Outer plating, minor." Another vibration followed, then another like distant footsteps. "The fragments are shifting," Senna said. "Some kind of magnetic interaction. They are drifting closer together." Lyra's hands tightened on the armrests. "Veyra, prepare to withdraw." "I am trying," Veyra said, "but the thrusters are responding sluggishly." Silas reached the engineering console and scanned the readouts. "Metallic dust is clogging the intake filters," he said, reducing efficiency. "Can you clear it?" Lyra asked. "I will try." He moved quickly through the corridor, the faint tremors of drifting impacts echoing through the hull. In the engine bay, he opened the intake housing and began clearing the fine metallic residue that had begun to accumulate like glittering sand. Over the comm, Veyra's voice came through, strained but steady. "We are losing maneuverability." 30 seconds, Silas said. "Hold your position." "I am holding," she said, "but I am not enjoying it." He cleared the last of the residue and sealed the housing. "Try now." A moment later, he felt the subtle shift of thrust returning, the ship responding once more like a living thing, regaining its strength. "We have control," Veyra said, relief clear in her voice. "Good," Lyra said. "Withdraw from the field." The ship turned slowly, easing its way back through the drifting fragments. The magnetic disturbances weakened, the vibrations faded, and at last the debris field lay behind them, shrinking into a faint, silent cloud. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Veyra exhaled loudly. "Well," she said, "that was unpleasant." Senna leaned back in her chair. "Your definition of unpleasant is remarkably calm." "I am screaming internally," Veyra said. Lyra laughed softly, the sound carrying more relief than amusement. Silas returned to the bridge and leaned against the bulkhead, folding his arms. "You handled that well," he said. Lyra looked at him. "We handled it," she corrected. He inclined his head slightly. "Yes, we did." They set a new course, leaving the debris field behind. Hours later, the tension finally eased, replaced by the quiet rhythm of travel. Veyra began humming softly to herself, an unfamiliar melody that seemed to echo the distant stars. "What is that?" Silas asked. "A lullaby," she said. "Our mother used to sing it when we were afraid during long flights." Senna glanced at her, her expression softening. Lyra looked out at the stars, her posture relaxed for the first time since the encounter. Silas listened to the melody and felt something settle inside him, a quiet sense of belonging that grew stronger with each passing day. Later, as they gathered in the galley, Veyra raised a cup in mock solemnity. "To surviving mysterious debris field," she declared, "and to cleaning intake filters," Senna added. Lyra looked at Silas, "and to the engineer who saved us from drifting forever." Silas shook his head, but he could not suppress a small smile. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, bright and silent, and the ship moved among them, not as a wounded relic, but as a living vessel carrying 4 people who, slowly and without quite realizing it, were becoming something more than a crew. Time passed in a way that felt both swift and unhurried, marked not by calendars but by star systems crossed, repairs completed, and quiet conversations that lingered long after the engines had dimmed for rest cycle. The ship no longer felt like a place held together by determination alone. It felt balanced, steady, alive in a way Silas had never experienced on any station. One morning cycle, Senna called everyone to the observation deck. "I have recalibrated the long-range scanners," she said, her voice carrying a restrained excitement. "There is a stellar nursery ahead, a forming system. The gravitational readings are extraordinary." Veyra leaned over the console. "Does extraordinary mean dangerous?" "Yes," Senna said. "Then why are you smiling?" "Because it is also beautiful." Lyra considered the readings for a moment, then nodded. "We will approach, but maintain a safe distance." The forming system appeared slowly, first as a faint glow, then as vast clouds of luminous gas swirling around embryonic stars. Streams of plasma arced between gravitational knots, flickering like silent lightning across distances too large to comprehend. The colors shifted constantly, gold, violet, pale blue, like a living painting unfolding in slow motion. For several minutes, no one spoke. Veyra finally broke the silence. "If I ever try to describe this," she said softly, "I will sound like a terrible poet." "You already sound like a terrible poet," Senna replied without looking up. "I will eject you into the nearest nebula," Veyra said calmly. Lyra sighed. "Please do not eject anyone into anything today." Silas stood slightly apart, watching the shifting light. He felt the same quiet sense of awe he had known as a young apprentice, before routine had dulled everything into repetition. Space, he remembered, was not empty. It was vast, complex, endlessly changing, and sometimes impossibly beautiful. They spent several hours mapping the region, recording data that would later be valuable to navigators and researchers. Senna worked with intense focus, occasionally muttering calculations under her breath so quickly that the words blurred together. Lyra coordinated their course with steady precision. Veyra maintained position, adjusting thrusters in minute increments that kept the ship perfectly stable, despite subtle gravitational currents. At one point, a sudden ripple of charged particles swept past the hull, making the lights flicker. Veyra looked up sharply. "Was that supposed to happen?" "Yeah," Senna said. "Probably." "Probably is not a comforting word." "It is statistically reassuring," Senna replied. Silas chuckled quietly, then moved to the engineering console to monitor the ship's shielding. The systems held steady, the faint hum of energy fields vibrating through the deck like a distant heartbeat. Later, when the work was done, they gathered in the galley, tired but satisfied. Veyra attempted to prepare a meal again, insisting she had improved her technique. The result was edible. "This is significantly less structural," Silas admitted after the first bite. "That is high praise," Veyra said proudly. Lyra leaned back in her chair, watching them with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly, looking at Silas. "Leaving the station?" Silas considered the question carefully. "No," he said at last. "I regret not leaving sooner." Senna nodded slightly as if that answer confirmed something she had already suspected. That evening, the ship drifted in orbit around a small, quiet moon at the edge of the forming system. The stars beyond were faint, veiled by luminous clouds, and the silence felt deeper than usual, almost contemplative. Veyra sat cross-legged on the observation deck floor, staring out at the glowing horizon. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked quietly. Lyra and Senna both knew who she meant. "Our parents," Lyra said softly. Veyra nodded. "Yes," Lyra said. "Every day." Senna rested her hands on the console. "I think they would be proud," she said. Veyra gave a small, uncertain laugh. "We nearly destroyed the ship 3 times in the first month." "They nearly destroyed it twice," Silas said. "The third time was entirely your fault." Veyra looked at him, pretending to be offended, but the tension in the room had eased. Lyra looked at Silas. "And what do you think?" she asked. Silas met her gaze. "I think they would be relieved," he said, "because they would see that you are not alone." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint whisper of the ship's life support systems and the distant crackle of charged particles brushing the hull. Veyra lay back on the floor, folding her hands behind her head. You know, she said, when we first asked you to stay, I was certain you would refuse. I nearly did, Silas admitted. What changed your mind? He thought for a moment. You needed someone, he said. And I realized I needed something too. Senna glanced at him. Purpose? Yes, Silas said. And perhaps belonging. Lyra looked out at the glowing clouds of the forming stars, her expression calm and thoughtful. Then we found what we were searching for, she said quietly. Silas did not answer, but he felt the truth of her words settle inside him, like a star coming to rest in its orbit. Later, as the others slept, he walked alone through the quiet corridors, listening to the steady hum of the engines. The ship felt familiar now in every detail. The faint vibration of the deck plates, the soft glow of the control panels, even the distant rhythm of the life support systems. He paused in the engine room, resting his hand against the cool metal of the reactor housing. For years he had believed that purpose was something distant, something to be found in grand achievements or distant destinations. Now he understood that it could be quieter than that, woven into daily work, shared laughter, and the simple act of keeping something and someone safe. The ship moved silently through the luminous dark, carrying its 4 travelers onward, and Silas felt no desire to turn back. The message arrived on a quiet cycle, carried by a narrow-band transmission that slipped through the ship's communication array like a whisper. Senna was the first to notice it. She frowned at the console, adjusting the signal filters, then called the others to the bridge. Silas arrived last, wiping grease from his hands, and saw the faint projection hovering above the display. A formal emblem rendered in pale light, unmistakably Kyrathi. Lyra's posture straightened at once. "Open it," she said. The message unfolded into a recorded voice, calm and official. The Kyrathi Exploration Council acknowledged receipt of their recent survey data and confirmed that their expedition license had been provisionally restored, pending verification of crew requirements. A final review would be conducted within 2 weeks. If the requirements were met, the ship and its mission would be formally recognized under the Council's registry. The message ended. Silence filled the bridge. "Well," Veyra said at last, "that sounds important." "It is," Senna said quietly. Lyra looked at Silas. "They will require proof of a 4th crew member," she said. "Formal records, identity registration." Silas folded his arms. "That seems reasonable." "Yes," Lyra said softly. "But it also means this is no longer a temporary arrangement." The words lingered between them, not heavy, but significant. Veyra broke the tension first. "We should celebrate," she declared. "Important announcements require celebration." "With what?" Senna asked. "We have nutrient packs and something that may or may not be bread." "I will improvise," Veyra said confidently. "That," Silas said, "is exactly what concerns me." Despite his skepticism, the evening turned into one of the warmest they had shared. Veyra's improvised meal was chaotic but surprisingly good, and at one point she attempted to create a ceremonial drink by mixing 3 entirely incompatible beverages, producing a liquid that glowed faintly and emitted a gentle humming sound. "No one drink that," Silas said immediately. "I was not going to," Senna said. "I was considering naming it." Lyra laughed, the sound clear and unguarded, and Silas realized he had not heard her laugh like that when they first met. In the days that followed, they prepared for the Council's verification. Senna compiled navigation logs and survey data with meticulous precision. Lyra drafted formal reports, her confidence evident in every word. Veyra, after some persuasion, assisted Silas in performing a full diagnostic of every major system to ensure the ship was in flawless condition. At one point, while tightening a panel in the engine room, Veyra glanced at Silas. "You know," she said, "you no longer walk like someone who expects to leave." Silas paused, considering that. "No," he said. "I suppose I do not." "Good," Veyra said simply. The verification came sooner than expected. A Council probe vessel emerged from jump space, its hull gleaming like polished stone. The inspection was thorough but efficient. Records were reviewed, systems scanned, and finally the inspector, a calm, silver-haired Kyrathi woman, with ears slightly longer than the sisters, stood on the bridge, studying them all in silence. You have endured difficulties, she said at last, but you have adapted well. Her gaze rested on Silas. And you are the fourth. Yes, Silas said. She inclined her head. Then the requirement is fulfilled. Your expedition is recognized. The words seemed to release a tension none of them had fully realized they carried. When the probe departed, the ship felt lighter somehow, as if the stars themselves had drawn closer. That night, they gathered in the observation deck, watching a distant star rise over the curve of a quiet planet. The light spilled across the hull in soft gold, illuminating the bridge in a warm glow. Lyra stood at the viewport, her expression thoughtful. When our parents began this journey, she said, they believed exploration was about discovering new worlds. I think now, it is also about discovering who you become along the way. Senna nodded. We are not the same as we were. Veyra stretched out on the deck, staring up at the ceiling. I am still the same, she said, but better at flying. You are better at many things, Lyra said gently. Silas stood beside them, looking out at the endless stars. He thought of the station, of the endless corridors and silent days, and it felt like a distant life, belonging to someone he no longer was. I used to think purpose was something you found, he said quietly. Now I think it is something you build, slowly, with other people. Lyra looked at him, her eyes bright in the starlight. Then we built something good. Yes, Silas said. We did. Veyra sat up suddenly. I have decided something. That is rarely reassuring, Senna said. I have decided, Veyra continued, ignoring her, that we should adopt a formal title for Silas. I already have a title, Silas said. Engineer. No, Veyra said. Something better. Lyra exchanged a glance with Senna, and then she stepped forward, her voice calm but full of quiet conviction. In Kyrathi tradition, she said, those who preserve a family's future may be named as kin, not by blood but by choice. Senna nodded. It is the highest honor we can give. Silas felt a sudden tightness in his chest, unexpected and difficult to put into words. Lyra met his eyes. If you will accept it, she said, we would name you our brother. For a moment, Silas could not speak. The vast silence of space stretched around them, the stars burning steadily, indifferent and eternal. Yet in that small, quiet ship, something profoundly human and profoundly alien was taking shape. At last he nodded. I would accept, he said. Veyra whooped loudly and nearly knocked over a chair. Senna laughed, and even Lyra's composure faltered as she smiled. Later, as the ship set course for a new, uncharted region, Silas stood alone on the bridge for a while, watching the stars drift past. He felt no uncertainty, no lingering doubt. The path ahead was unknown, but it no longer frightened him. Behind him, he could hear the faint sounds of the others talking, their voices warm and familiar. He turned back to the console, adjusted the course slightly, and allowed himself a small, quiet smile. The engines brightened, the stars stretched into lines of light, and together they went on. No longer four travelers bound by circumstance, but a family carried forward into the endless, shining dark.